Lamar Jackson has been disappointing, and even the biggest Ravens fans or Lamar fans would tell you that. The two real tests the Ravens have faced include the Chiefs and Steelers. Both have ended in losses, with Lamar being painfully average passing, borderline bad. The defense carried him in both those games. And I don't think it's all necessarily on him as far as their offensive issues go. I think it's a collective effort, a multi-layered issue, and of course, he's not totally innocent in the matter. For one, it does appear Lamar, to me, has lost confidence in the pocket, and he doesn't seem to trust his O-line as much as he used to. He is not pulling the trigger quickly on some throws. He seems to be standing around the pocket. He looks to get out of the pocket relatively quickly, looking for a running lane that isn't there, because that is the last thing teams are going to let him do at this point. They have virtually not changed their scheme, and where they have changed their scheme due to personnel changes, it has not been for the better. Teams are anticipating the Ravens' play calls, adapting to their play style from last year. They are refusing to let Lamar dictate the game with his feet. At this point last year, he had 165 more rushing yards, and he struck fear into defenses. What he was able to do on the ground was special. And of course, he's still the greatest rushing quarterback of all time. But he's not doing what he was doing last year, and teams are forcing him more towards passing the ball.
I'll stop right there, then you can keep going. Michael Vick is substantially better as a rusher than him. Don't ever say slanderous things like that again.
I mean, the numbers say otherwise.
Yeah, Vic dominates him in yards per attempt because he ran a more conventional style of offense.
The highlights will also say otherwise, with Lamar juking people out and running.
You ever watched
a
Michael Vick highlights?
I have watched a Michael Vick highlight, and Lamar's are just as good, if not better.
They're not.
Now let me continue my
piece
piece on Lamar Jackson.
Go on.
I want to talk a little bit about their personnel and why this has had a negative impact and is not being talked about enough in the mainstream media. They let go of Hayden Hurst, a decision that made sense because they had Nick Boyle and Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews, an elite tight end. Nick Boyle, a good tight end. And I think this has hurt them. They no longer can bring 3 tight end sets out onto the field. They only have 2 tight ends on the roster. These tight ends helped maul in the run game last year and were assets in the passing game. Last year, they combined for 40.1% of targets for the Ravens, 45% of their receiving yards, and 38% of the team's receiving touchdowns. They don't have this dynamic in their offense in 2020. Nick Boyle last year, who was competing with 2 other very good tight ends, totaled 43 targets. And through 7 games this year, he's only received 12 targets. They are not getting him the ball, even though he doesn't have to compete with Hayden Hurst anymore. And in general, I think Lamar is more successful when he's throwing to receivers and tight ends who have a large catch radius and tends to throw to them more often, as evidenced by the statistics I just listed off. Hayden Hurst, 6'4", 245. Nick Boyle, 6'4", 270. Mark Andrews, 6'5", 256. These are big-bodied receivers he was throwing to. You take a look at the receiving core they have now, which has to make up for the production lost by Hayden Hurst and the production that Nick Boyle's left behind by him simply not getting targeted. You have 5'9", 180-pound Marquise Brown, who I actually love. I love him as a prospect. I think he's a great receiver. But as your number one receiver and as Lamar's number one threat, I don't think he's the best fit in this offense. 5'11", 200-pound Willie Snead. He's never been a number one stud receiver. He's short, not a large catch radius. I don't think he fits that well with Lamar. Then there's 5'11", rookie Devon Duvernay. I hope I pronounced that right. And another short, fast guy. I don't think it works as well with Lamar, who you see being very successful with Mark Andrews and was very successful with all 3 of his tight ends last year. They do have 6'4" Miles Boykins, but they have not been incorporating in the offense as much as Brown and Snead, and he's not like he's the next Julio Jones. Isaiah, what are your thoughts on Lamar's lack of success and the Ravens being slightly disappointing on the offensive end of the ball?
Well, I will say you're not entirely wrong. Your instinct to blame some of the troubles on the personnel is correct. You've just picked out the wrong points. You've gone after the wrong people that are the issue, and I'll explain that before I get into the real reason Lamar Jackson is struggling this year. But if you notice, Mark Ingram, a Pro Bowler last year, had a very good season, 1,000 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns, is nowhere close to what he was. He is on pace for half of that this year. Ravens are trying to do what the 49ers did and use a triumvirate of running backs to mask the fact they have a weak passing attack. And don't get me wrong, they can score their passing game, but last year when Lamar won MVP, they were 22nd in passing yards and 12th in yards per attempt, I believe. That's not a great passing attack, but they decided we are going to run it with multiple people instead of just letting Mark Ingram be the primary back. Whether that be due to injury or the promise of Gus Edwards and everyone else in the Baltimore backfield, I don't know, but it's clearly not working. They're less dominant in the run. I don't think that's due to tight ends. I think that's due to the fact they're not letting Mark Ingram carry the load. And another thing which is going to hurt their offensive tackle that had just happened this last week. He is probably out for the year. That's a sad state of affairs. That's also
right after he signs a massive contract.
I mean, good for him. He got his money. I'm happy for him. But at the same time, that's going to hurt the run game more. But I truly think in terms of personnel, Ingram not being the primary guy in the backfield anymore and them switching and rotating guys out is what is hurting them in terms of that. But the running back issue is not their main source of worry. The true issue is, and this may be hard for some people to hear, but while Lamar Jackson is special, he is not so much better than everybody else that he can get by on athleticism alone. Last year, he benefited from teams not having any game film of him in the offensive system they are running and being the fastest quarterback in the league. A big part of that is now gone. Teams have a year of film on him. They know what the Baltimore offense is like. They know what their tight ends do in the run game. They know his motions out of the backfield. And now that teams have filmed the offensive system with Lamar in it, he's not going to be as successful. And I don't think he'll ever quite get back to what he was last year in the current offensive system. Harbaugh is an amazing coach, so I think there is a decent chance that if Lamar struggles over the next 2 years, they will revamp the system again to make him more comfortable. And if you think I'm crazy with that, I'd like to point out the fact, this may seem kind of obscure, but if you go back and look at Lamar Jackson's college stats, and college is the portion of players' careers where they truly dominate with their athleticism. So much more than the NFL. It's easy to be a super athlete and be successful in college. During his best year as a college quarterback, when he was faster and quicker than everybody else, he averaged 6.9 yards a carry. Last season, when teams had no film of him, and he had just gained all this muscle in the offseason, he averaged 6.9 yards a carry. He is never going to be able to get back there in that current offensive system. There are too many strong, fast, physical players who can at least keep up with Lamar Jackson and tackle him in open space in the NFL for that to work again this year. I think Lamar will still be a top 10, maybe a top 5 quarterback, but teams having film of him is going to greatly slow him down.
I mean, we largely agree on the idea and the concept that it's the scheme is the reason that they're failing, and you addressed more so their run game and maybe why their run game hasn't been as successful from a running back standpoint. And I don't think it's because Mark Ingram isn't carrying the load. I think giving J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards the ball more has actually been beneficial. J.K. Dobbins has only carried the ball 40 times. He's got more yards than Mark Ingram, and he's obviously averaging a higher yards per carry. Gus Edwards is averaging a slightly higher yards per carry on 14 more carries than Mark Ingram. So I don't think it comes down to who's carrying the ball. I think it comes down to really the tight ends once again, because they're not coming out in three. Well, they can't come out in 3 tight end sets as much. They're keying on Lamar Jackson as a running threat. So I just think overall, and which you already explained, so I don't need to elaborate too much on, it's just in general teams understand their running scheme, and with not having receiving threats that fit Lamar Jackson's play style, it's all just not working out to the extent that we would like to see.
I mean, you can say the scheme's the issue all you want, but at the end of the day, this is the best possible offensive scheme in the NFL for Lamar Jackson right now. If you subbed him onto any other team, save maybe the Chiefs, I don't think he'd have as much success. This team was built around Lamar.
No, I agree it's built around Lamar, but I think the personnel also build the scheme, and when you have 3 good tight ends like they did last year, that helped a lot as far as the types of runs and formation sets they're able to put out there. And also when you have your best receivers 5'9", and Lamar can sometimes struggle throwing into tight windows, the 5'9" frame isn't going to help you with that.
But you don't think Hollywood Brown's creating big separation with his 1 catch last week?
They also not throwing him the ball and too much.
Throw the tweet up on the screen.
He was kind of upset on Twitter. That has been our video on Lamar Jackson. Let us know what you thought about his failures, missteps, the Ravens' failures on offense. Do you think they are still a Super Bowl contender? Like the video, subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.